What's the worst HR is not your friend story you've witnessed/experienced? Pulled into a meeting with 2 HR reps in the middle of my shift. Taken to this really nice boardroom, which was confusing because I was just a grunt and this is literally floors above where I should ever be. They sat me down and said basically, what do you have to say for yourself? Me, still confused, tells them I have no idea what they're talking about. Everyone is really quiet and serious and I'm scared shitless. And they say, you know what you did, this is cause for termination, blah blah. I'm literally thinking this is really excessive for being a few minutes late sometimes. I insist I don't know what's going on. One of them maybe realized something was wrong and flips open a file and says, you're 20 right? Turns out they got me mixed up with someone else who has the same name. On the elevator ride down by myself I was still sweating. Don't know what that other person did, but man, HR does not play. I went to HR to report that my team's manager was illegally shorting all of our paychecks. HR's response was to adopt a new, company-wide policy addressing the paycheck issue and back-paying most people for a certain amount, and also to frame me for work avoidance. HR and IT disabled part of my login account to a tool we used, and then fired me a few months later after failing to fix the problem and allowing me to actually do my job. They tried to deny my unemployment claim afterward. Told the unemployment rep that they had logs showing that I did something to break the tool I don't even have access to break in the first place. They also didn't think to disable my email access in a timely manner, so I was able to back up all my emails with IT documenting exactly what went down. Unemployment approved my claim and hit them with a major penalty to their insurance. HR ordered me to downgrade my 3 excellent employee reviews to satisfactory because management didn't recognize their names. I got written up for telling my employees this. HR denied that they told me anything, even though I had the emails from them documenting it. Totally worth it. My employees were excellent and got the raises they deserved. The HR/payroll manager at a small hospital I worked at had a bad habit of not paying out the sign-on bonus that was paid out incrementally in 3 payments through the course of a year and sign-on bonuses for picking up extra shifts. After repeated requests to be belatedly compensated, I took it to corporate who addressed my issue immediately. A couple weeks later I was terminated on what amounted to a technicality where I forget my badge one shift and my relief was late to take over sitting with a patient, causing me to receive more points against me than if I had called out for that shift. When I was called in to receive my notification, the director of nursing was shocked, but ultimately not much she could do. Overall I've been able to get along with HR departments with one exception. I was working a help desk job for a company during college and the head of HR called in for help. He was making an Excel spreadsheet and couldn't figure out how to make a formula do what he wanted. I offered to come take a look as we were in the same building and he told me I couldn't because the spreadsheet was full of confidential information. So I asked then if he could describe what exactly he was trying to do, without giving away any specific info, and he told me that what he was trying to do was confidential. So I clarified that he wanted me to tell him how to do something but I couldn't see it and he wouldn't even tell me what it was he was trying to do. At that point he agreed that I wouldn't be able to assist him since he couldn't divulge anything. As soon as we hung up he called my boss to complain that I was useless. I worked at a smallish company that grew big enough to hire our person. Her office was down from mine, so in the mornings I'd swing by and say hi. That turned into grabbing a cup of coffee she had just made, into having a pastry and talking about life. I found that if I mentioned someone's name in passing, a few minutes later she would spill the beans about that person's life. What work issues they had, health issues, family issues, etc. I learned really quick any issues I had not to take them to her. She made it like 6 months before she got fired. HR hired consultants to run morale building employee input sessions. Basically saying, we're not from the company. You can tell us all the things you don't like about working here and would like to see changed and we'll put it all into a report for management. Don't worry, everything is anonymous, we just need material for our report and you guys get to have your say in improving things around here. Turns out HR and the consultants recorded all the sessions and played the highlights for management. People were disciplined for criticizing the company or their immediate superiors, and any shred of faith or trust in management that the employees may have had was instantly incinerated. Managers now complain that they don't know what's going on in their teams because nobody tells them anything. I wonder why. HR person used her position to collect intel to get people she didn't like fired. I asked my boss for a desk phone with a speakerphone function because sometimes I need it at work to conference people on the phone with people in my office. We had these old, yellow phones. So he told me to make a request to him and CC our office manager, and he'd send it to the HR department of our region via email. So I put forth a nice email outlining what I am requesting, and why I need it for HR's request. My office manager replies all and asks HR per Lazarus 870 request, should I order the phone through the same channels I have used before, or is there a new policy? HR responded livid. She demanded to know why I needed this phone, it was in the email, and then accused my office manager of going behind HR's back in ordering phones before without approval. My office manager told my boss, who called HR and chewed her out, and I could hear yelling. My boss came out of his office and yelled at me, "See what you've caused?" He was fired up, but I know he didn't mean anything malicious by it. I just laughed. HR had to apologize to office manager for accusations. Turns out, after everybody yelled their fucking lungs out for an hour, the speakerphone I needed was literally free and we had boxes of them in storage. I had it for a month before HR rolled out new fancy phones that were actually expensive and convoluted, requiring training to set up and use. At the company picnic we had to wear fucking name tags, and I had never met HR lady face to face, and she came up and said, "Oh, we haven't met, what's your name?" And I was trying to hide my name tag, but she read it and didn't seem happy to see me. Co-worker accidentally backed his company truck into my personal car while it was parked. He alerted me and our local manager immediately. We took photos, filled out the incident report, yada yada yada. Everyone in our office was in agreement about what happened, that it was an honest accident and the company's insurance should cover the cost of fixing my car. Then the HR director got involved. First he tried to get me to assume liability since it was my personal vehicle that caused the accident. My car was parked in the parking lot and I was inside at my desk when it happened. When I pointed this out, he backed down and said he would file the claim. Next I got a call from a hostile insurance adjuster from my company's insurance demanding that I provide my insurance information or they would be pursuing legal action. It turns out the HR director had filed the claim saying that I had run into the parked work truck with my car and tried to flee the scene, but was witnessed by a co-worker who reported me. I informed the adjuster what had actually happened and emailed her the photos and signed incident reports and witness statements that we had filled out, and she changed her tune pretty quickly and said she would get back to me. The next day I get a settlement agreement from HR asking me to accept $1,100 for repairs and to sign a form releasing the company from any further responsibility. I had only just dropped my car off at the body shop and hadn't even gotten the estimate back yet. I declined and was told that I either had to accept their offer or be out of luck. At this point I reached out to my own insurance and told them what had happened. As I went through the sequence of events, I could hear my agent getting almost giddy about all the blatantly illegal tactics HR had tried on me. In the end they processed my claim and pursued my own company's insurance through subrogation. He also mentioned that they would probably be seeking additional damages due to falsification of statements in the initial claim. Don't fuck with USAA. In the end the damage ended up costing over $4,000 to fix, but I didn't have to pay a cent, not even my deductible. I don't know if the HR director experienced and consequences, but there was a comment in our finance VP's year-end report about needing to reduce extraneous costs due to reporting delays and inaccuracies in liability claims. At my last real job before striking out on my own, I had an exit interview with the HR lady, who was actually just someone who was friends with the company president, who was filling in because the actual HR lady with a degree in HR and everything quit. A lot of people at this place quit. It was a terrible place to work with out-of-touch management and delusions of grandeur, limping along building websites for a business niche that was mostly old people who thought the internet was magic. During the exit interview, she asked why I was leaving. I told her I liked my co-workers a lot, but hated the company. She got this exasperated look and got genuinely upset, and told me that she'd been getting that same line from everybody else who quit and had their exit interview recently. It boggled my mind that they could hear the same thing over and over again from so many people putting in their time until they could go on to something better and not stop to think they should change something. Office survey. I put in some honest opinions of a member of my team. There were fair and honest criticisms of a system which was not working as designed. I had little contact with the system, but the whole thing seemed reasonable to me. I was, in effect, demoted for this. A position was created above me and a colleague who was my equal was to be my manager. Position did not exist before. This happened the same week my husband died and the management felt like shit because of the timing. But still, on my return to work, I was basically called out for criticizing the same system in a whole company meeting, and it was explained how X system should and did work, and anyone who thought it didn't work was stupid. Cut to 2 years later. Person above me quits, partly because they're scared to tell company that anything's gone wrong because of how I was treated, and they have to promote me to that position because it now exists according to the rules and I'm the only one who can do it. Again, in a whole company meeting, they admit X system isn't working and we're having a consultation to find out why I laughed. I couldn't help it. I had to leave the room before it turned into hysteria. Edit, typos. This post has reminded me that people quit bad bosses, not bad jobs. Humans can tolerate very bad situations if they feel appreciated. One of our departments shut down at noon thanks to HVAC issue. Building management needed to move cubicles and pull out a chunk of drop ceiling, so the manager took them all out to the bar for a team building exercise. Everyone in the department arrived the next morning to a final notice in lieu of termination on their desk that cited drinking on the job and time theft. The manager had an extra special third for improper use of a company credit card. None of what they done was against company policy, so the manager's boss, a vice president, called HR and told them to back whatever newbie had written them the hell off. HR instead forwarded over a brand new policy manual and told the VP to make sure all the write-ups were signed and returned by the end of day. VP goes up the chain to his boss, the CEO. The CEO hadn't even seen it, let alone authorized it. HR doesn't want to back down, even when the CEO calls them. Sure, he hadn't authorized it, but he had asked them to consider revamping it back in March. This was the glorious revamp. They'd gone back to square one and completely rewritten it. It's full of best practices, industry standard rules and easy to understand language. Oh, and they'd been enforcing it since May, so it would probably be best for him to just sign off on it and any concerns he found could be incorporated in a future revision. Yeah, no. The CEO didn't make it past the first page before finding a contract law violation. Page 3 had a federal labor law violation, page 4 would make the NLRB angry, and the section on PTO would get them sued 6 ways to Sunday. The head of HR was asked to resign. When she refused, she was fired. After 4 years on the job, I was given a first and final warning for asking why the hell HR was behind a locked door and now dominated over half the first floor, filled with new furniture that was unused after 6 months. Meanwhile, my chair was taken by another employee and I was told to use the chair without padding. An executive from another department heard my complaint, stole one of the unused chairs from the HR expansion, and gave it to me, explaining that if I did it, I'd be fired. She did it, daring them to fire her. I worked in the bakery at a Fred Meyer's for about 6 months when I was freshly 19. There was this like 45-year-old guy in meat/seafood who was super creepy, and all of the women in my department and even one woman who was previously in my department but was moved to another to get away from him warned me about this man from day one. Somehow, anytime I was on my break, he would be on his break too, and he'd follow me into the break room and try to flirt with me the entire time. Not only did he follow me on my breaks and lunches, but if I had to walk to another part of the store to get anything, he would run to catch up to me and walk with me. He followed me to my car a few times after I got off shift, and the scariest time was when I was closing by myself and he came into the back of the bakery and kept following me around the long table, trying to grab me while telling me how much he liked me and how badly he wanted to be with me. I told him no and to leave me alone constantly, while managers just shrugged and said that's just how he is. My boyfriend threatened him when he got off work one time. Hell, even my father came in and threatened him because no one was doing anything. The final straw for me was one night when I was closing alone again. He came into the back area and followed me into the freezer and tried to kiss me, and he grabbed my ass. I pushed him and fucking ran to the closing manager, who also functioned as HR. He said he'd watch the store footage and talk to me the next day. Next day comes and he pulls me into his office and says that he saw the video and saw this man stalking me inside and outside of work, and that he talked to him about his behavior, to which the man responded that it was just a misunderstanding. I replied that this had been going on for months and I wasn't going to take it anymore, and he had the fucking nerve to tell me that he just does this to all the new girls. As soon as another girl gets hired, he'll leave me alone. I told him he was a bastard and quit on the spot. Turns out the creep was the brother of the store's owner, who had been to jail in the past for sexual assault and rape but was now cleaning his life up. TLDR, 45-year-old man stalked 19-year-old me for 6 months trying to be with me. Told managers on many occasions, they didn't listen. Guy finally assaults me, managers talk with him, he says it's a misunderstanding. Manager says he just does this to all the new girls, and when a new girl gets hired he'll chase her and not me. Turns out Guy is a registered sex offender for sexual assault and rape, but he's the little brother of the store's owner, so he gets a pass. Not HR, but heed my warning, don't type anything into your work computer that you wouldn't say directly to your company's HR person's face. I have seen people had cases built against them for poor work and ultimately fired for the shit they say over Skype. I reported sexual harassment to HR at a large international company when I was 21. They notified my harasser, an older VP, before I even made it back to my desk. I was fired a few days later, despite an excellent performance review the week before he propositioned me. I worked in a warehouse that regularly concealed the shipping of dangerous goods to save money. This went on for years. As time went on, I bubbled up through the ranks and was eventually made manager of the warehouse. I outright refused to ship anything anywhere until we started to claim our dangerous goods shipments properly. Their solution? The boss started to sign his name instead. This went on for a few weeks until HR found out. They obviously knew how much trouble the president could have got into. So the next time a shipment had to go out, they got the newest guy in the warehouse to start signing his name instead, claiming they were training him how to do paperwork, but the poor kid had no idea. So when the driver showed to pick up his shipment, I told him that there were a bunch of dangerous substances concealed in the shipment. So he refused it and left. I got told later that my actions were damaging to the company image and it had to stop. I told HR exactly what was going on and how I would not be a part of it. Less than a week after that, I was removed from my position due to company restructuring and laid off. Some of the most crooked shit I've ever seen. My rough estimates ballpark the money they saved at about $250,000 per year. Scumbags. The whole family. Every second Friday of the month, people in my office would get drinks after work. One time it happened to fall on my birthday. Because they let me pick the bar, I figured I would just invite some friends there too to meet up with me after. Usually these drinks lasted from like 4 to 5:30 with my coworkers. Well, One co-worker, who was generally a bit odd, stayed and sort of stuck to me and my friends. I didn't really want her there, but she couldn't take a hint and I was 3 cocktails in, so I just gave up and didn't say anything. One of my friends starts talking about sex. Nothing particularly vulgar or kinky, or even about our personal lives. It was mainly just about the politics of sex and relationships. The following Tuesday I got an email from our about having inappropriate conversations of a sexual nature with co-workers. I tried to explain what happened, and even though I think the person believed me, and other workers corroborated my story, I was written up for sexual misconduct. I obviously did not want that on my record, so I escalated it all the way up the company, and eventually, we had a 4-hour meeting with a regional HR person where my co-worker just cried and caved. Then afterward she had a bunch of people in trouble for a toxic work environment because nobody wanted to be around her and she was never invited to any social events. It was the dumbest fucking thing I've ever experienced. Edit, getting a lot of messages, and I can't respond to them all. But my blanket statement to everyone is that yes, as an individual, she sucked, but that doesn't mean all HR reports of sexual harassment or misconduct are false and unwarranted. Please don't use this to push that type of agenda. Also, like I said, she was odd. Not so much a Karen, but like a former Jehovah's Witness who was homeschooled and did not know how to function in the real world. Upon giving 2 weeks notice, I get this stupid rant about millennial snowflakes, how we can't take the stress of a real job, and how we think we are so important and unique, but in reality the only thing that would happen, is that they would find another engineer to fill in for me, and things would be like I never existed. After the initial shock, I replied with "You are absolutely correct. Me staying or not is meaningless. Consider my resignation immediate from this moment, please give me the paperwork to sign." At my job we used to hire a few special needs individuals who would do some cleaning and light duty things. One day one of them did something wrong, it was very minor but I can't remember the specifics, and the manager said out loud, right next to this guy, "Why do we keep hiring these retards?" and referred to his job coach as his handler. One of the girls that saw it happen was rightfully pissed off and reported it to HR. The next day she was put on unpaid leave for creating a hostile work environment. Same manager is still here. She is not. HR was the boss's sister and the boss was a narcissist. The sister/HR had very little actual life experience because they both came from a big farmer family and never really had a sense of what working a real job was like. Boss could do no wrong in his sister's eyes, so complaining about anything just got you gaslit. Glad I'm not there anymore. During an exit interview with my last job, HR asked me where I was going to next. HR, so what's the name of the company you are moving to next? Me, I'm not really comfortable disclosing that. Are you sure? It would really help us out. Me, I'd rather not, sir. It's company policy that you need to tell us. Me, I said no, and if you continue further you'll be hearing from my lawyer. Shocked Pikachu face told my old boss this after I left and he was absolutely shocked. HR have no right to know anything about the next place you are moving to. It's literally none of their business, but they tried to press it out of me anyway, more than likely to call them up and talk shit about me. A skilled nursing facility I worked at got bought out by another company. New management comes in and starts cracking the whip and basically doing everything they can to decrease morale. What happens is predictable. People that have been employed in the building for 20 years start quitting left and right, patient ratios start going up while more work is required. They lose so much staff they resort to using a medical staffing agency, and the place has about half the staff on payroll to actually function independently. That management team has all left, but the effects are still withstanding. Not the type of answer you were looking for, but when the stupid, fucking, self-absorbed, airhead fucking twat HR person replied to spam email allegedly from the boss, and sent all the info for all 400 employees. Everything on your job application. Sent to scammers. Thanks, Kathy, you stupid cunt. Our HR always abuses the company budget. They have the nicest ergonomic keyboards, a fancy coffee machine in their office, and are the first to receive gifts from vendors. One time they did the food tasting for the company year-end party that they were organizing. Catering company allowed 2 people for food tasting, and will charge $100 for additional people. The entire HR department went in the afternoon, and charged the company for the tasting fee, of course. I used the term piss off, as in get lost, in an unofficial online forum. Someone alerted a corporate recruiter, who managed to dig through my previous posts, connect dots, narrow down who I was, and have the head of HR terminate my job offer without discussion. Never knew piss was considered profanity. Pick one. The HR director who put not 1, not 2, but 3 people on the job of auditing everyone's FMLA applications. We were to look up the medical terms, print out layperson-friendly summaries of them, add any notes of our own that might be helpful if we had prior healthcare experience. Also, she could make sure no one was fraudulently taking medical leave. For anyone who may not be aware, the Family and Medical Leave Act in the U.S. gives employees the right to take up to 12 weeks of leave from their job, unpaid. And while it isn't a HIPAA violation by the letter of the law, it certainly is in spirit. None of this information was any of this bitch's business, and none of the employees had any idea she was doing it. The HR guy who helped tabulate the test results for the customer service employees and admitted that even though the passing score was, let's say, a 70%, he loved the company so much that he had taken it upon himself to only pass people scoring above 95% up the chain. Might sound reasonable, until you factor in that these were personality tests designed to detect how subservient you were to others. The workers' comp lady who refused to train anyone on how to provide pay information to the feds in order to get benefits flowing, and who had accrued enough PTO to be out 5 and 6 weeks at a stretch, leaving injured employees to twist in the wind. I only spent a couple of years in HR. It was a couple of years too many. I will sweep streets and clean sewers before I will ever work with such psychopathic cunts again. Worked in HR for a time, and it soured my view of HR more than any stories I'd heard. One incident that stands out in my memory was a young casual worker who accused her boss of sexual harassment. I dutifully brought it up the chain, but the higher-ups did not care if the boss had done anything or not. The cost of not giving her any more hours was 0, so that's what they did. That's just one case that I dealt with, but you'd see it on a daily basis. There were literally pop-up notifications on the phone calls and emails from people deemed too high up to refuse. You're a part-time employee who's done everything right, hasn't been paid in 2 months, and can't make rent? Ooh, shit, outta luck. Nothing we can do. Meanwhile, their boss who forgot to put in a timesheet? Of course, sir, expedited payments, sir, will be in your account by close of business, sir. HR is there to protect the business. You want protection? Join a union. My ex's mom was in HR. She was pretty damn crappy about it and loved nothing more than coming home and telling us all the drama and gossip. Oh my lord, girl, and that's how I found out my married physician at the time was shtupping the married doctor in the next office over. That woman could not keep her damn mouth shut. Hilarious for me at the time, but holy shit looking back. I reported my boss to HR for sexist treatment. HR said they'd talk to me again before going to him. He fired me 2 days later, HR at his side. He was friends with all of the higher-ups, so I wasn't exactly surprised. They escorted me out before I could collect what I needed from my computer for proof. Yeah, I was young and dumb, and I learned, have backups. The last real job I had before the shit hit the fan, not counting a stint at a call center, was working for a DoD contractor. The company got bought out by another contractor, and they shuffled some of us around. About halfway through my stint at a new location, I started having some serious problems with one of the leads. Basically guys that were one step below the supervisor. Long story short, this guy was harassing me, falsifying records, claiming I was stealing time, and a laundry list of crap. I went to HR to voice my concerns, only to have the new HR director take the lead's side because they were old friends. I was given one of two options. Either A, they would buy out my remaining contract, or B, I could accept a transfer to somewhere else. Based on my skill set, I didn't relish the idea of being shuttled off to God knows where, so I let them buy out my contract. They paid me about half of what my remaining contract was, and I never looked back. The company I work for does anonymous surveys every year. My first 2 years I was under this horrible manager and in a terrible department. While the surveys were anonymous, they were broken down per manager, which is fine, but my manager had 3 people under him and it was easy to determine who was who. At a department meeting, the associate director said if the person who isn't happy wants to say something, now is the time or we will just move on. 30 people were in that room and most of them looked at me. It was so fucking embarrassing. My manager used to make me use an Excel sheet to track everything I did, and he would look over it during our weekly one-on-ones, and he would often say there is 20 minutes of your day not accounted for. I was probably shitting or talking to someone, but I needed to account for every minute. He also could barely speak English and wanted me to help him and correct him. Fuck that. That's not my job. Luckily he was taken out of a manager position and the department was split up, and now I'm in a new role making twice as much under a manager who is amazing and understanding. Recently I had COVID and went out. After 5 sick days your manager needs to put in for you to get short-term disability, so I signed on the 6th day so that wouldn't happen, and I told my boss I was logged on so that wouldn't happen, and he got mad at me and said don't even worry about that, I'm not reporting it. If he ever leaves I'm following him. When I complained to a co-worker about a minor dental insurance issue and HR contacted me about it within an hour. Now I know I can trust neither of you. Edit, sorry, drunken Friday night redditing equals can't word good. I had an insurance issue that I discussed with one person in HR privately, and mentioned to no one else. My co-worker then asked me about it an hour later. Meaning, my co-worker's buddy in HR must have gossiped about my issue, which was totally inappropriate. At least it was a small thing, and I learned I cannot trust that particular person in HR. Here in the Netherlands, the government provided almost all of your salary for companies that lost a certain amount of revenue in the lockdown. One of the conditions to apply for this support model was that a company could not fire anyone. My employer decided it was more valuable to piss on a colleague of mine than to make sure the other 30 or so colleagues had food on their plates and a roof over their head. LPT, GTFO of any company that calls you and your colleagues family. Edit, since this has gotten some traction, and because I'm Dutch, mandatory GEKOLONISEERD. An anesthesiologist I worked with refused to keep his mask on at the end of a surgery, even though it's required to keep the room sterile in case we would need to reopen, emergently. I asked him again to put his mask back on and he hit my arm. I got in his face about it and told him to never touch me or anyone else again. I wrote an incident report which went ignored. And followed up with HR. HR lady replied, well, what do you want me to do about it? After I relayed what happened, I replied, your job, and then silence from her. Never had a good experience from HR. The asshole anesthesiologist finally got fired after 5 more nurses came forward saying he hit them, as well. Went to HR on Tuesday because even though I enrolled in benefits, and my health insurance premium is coming out of my paycheck every week, I never got my ID cards. In fact, I called the insurance company and they never heard of me and couldn't help me. HR said they would get back to me. Yeah, right. In the 6 years I worked at a company, I forgot to hit the submit button on my timesheet once. QHR telling me that I wouldn't get paid for my worked hours and calling me in for a disciplinary interview, which was 1 hour of 4 people telling me how dare I forget to click submit. I forgot to hit submit because I was so overworked, and I couldn't believe all 4 of them had time to waste an hour on such a useless meeting. Edit, this Reddit post details more ridiculous experiences I had at this job. I worked in HR and here's my advice. never, ever willingly give up any information on phishing questions. Make sure your answers are brief, succinct, and don't elaborate unless absolutely necessary. Don't give second-hand information unless it directly impacts you or your work environment. My goal was to protect the bottom line under the guise of employee relations. If you become a headache and disruptive, regardless if you are in the right, we will find a way to terminate your employment. I spent hours upon hours in training learning how to ask the right questions to get the company's desired results. I will admit this may not be true for all HR departments, but for larger companies we are not your friend, and our attitude and pseudo-compassion is used as a disarming tactic to obtain the information we're looking for. Despite what you may be told, we do have an agenda. When I started my job, the person that was training me was telling me that a lead in a different department had been sexually harassing her, and she finally told HR about it. HR pulled their chat logs, and since she had called him a dick for calling her a hooker, she also got written up. When I got fired for having depression and being forthcoming about it after getting drowsy when starting a new medication, HR basically said, "We sympathize with your position, but we are not flexible enough for you." I'd asked for 2 days off in a year to just spend time at home while I was adjusting to the new meds and having a really shit time. Got a letter on my desk from my boss after I came back that was titled with termination of employment and asking me to come to a meeting 2 days later with HR. I basically went in, said, "If you are honestly firing me for having depression, that's fine, but just admit it and don't say it was for my performance, which I know for a damn fact has been fantastic." And they doubled down and said that they were not able to accommodate someone with my unique circumstances. Fuck those cunts. I once worked for a smaller DoD IT contractor, and we had an extremely toxic manager. She would report people for not being 15 minutes early, or for giving a hug to a coworker on their last day. She would hide on the other side of a cubicle wall to spy on people's conversations. Under her management, probably 20 to 30 people were fired just because she didn't like them, and as many others quit. Amazing talented people who were experts at their jobs. After many years of complaints, HR finally responded and sent an independent consultant to interview our team. At last, we were getting somewhere. Soon our misery would end, we thought. But we were all of us deceived. We all addressed our issues with toxic manager in our interviews with the consultant, and she wrote them all down in her notebook. My notes took up a whole page, even though I had never been targeted by toxic manager. A few weeks later, an all-hands meeting was called. Our HR rep was there, as was our manager and the independent consultant. Our HR rep stood up and addressed us. "Team, we've reviewed your comments and complaints about toxic manager. You all need to grow up. You're not in high school." Mine was a job where I was working in HR, getting screwed over by HR. I was coming into a job that I was overqualified for, but took it for the same salary as my last job because A, I hated my previous job and wanted an out, B, I really liked what the company did, railroad industry, my dream come true, and C, because they said they couldn't offer me more and it was already more than what they could offer. I was the IT guy for HR, and one day, about 7 months in, they asked me to pull a list of everyone that left the HR department in the last year. The list only consisted of 3 people, one was my predecessor. When I pull info from their database, it automatically brings in a lot of their HR info that I'm supposed to remove prior to sending it elsewhere in the company, which includes salary. They had been paying my predecessor, who was less qualified than I was, $20,000 more than myself. I was also driving over 90 minutes to / from work every day for this job because it was a dream of mine to work in the railroading industry. I had a new job within a few weeks, only a half-hour away from home. Edit, also the new job I got at the end did come with a pay increase. I worked for a telecommunications company as an engineer, and a course came up on some new equipment that the engineers were going to be working on. This course was 2 weeks abroad in a fancy hotel, etc. The HR department were very friendly with the sales department and decided that since they were going to sell the product, they would go on the course and not the engineers. Fast forward a month, the sales team come back from the luxury course all having failed it as it was too technical for them. The engineers now have to start work on equipment that we don't have a clue how to use. Management went fucking mental, sacked the entire HR department and we never had another one put in place. Company got along just fine without one. I worked for a company for 4 years. About 3 years in, they hired a new head of HR who was a total bitch. She would hardly speak to anyone who wasn't on the management team, and treated everyone else in the company with contempt. A colleague of mine, who today is my boss, gave notice because he was offered a better salary from one of the competitors. On his last day, the HR lady basically tried to force him to sign a contract saying that he was giving up his right to sue the company for any outstanding pay or bonus. Of course, he didn't sign, but the HR lady wouldn't take no for an answer and kept hounding him. I gave notice a few months later, and she tried the same bullshit with me. Having been warned by my buddy, I did the same thing. I returned all the company property, laptop, office keys, etc., and had them sign the receipt that they received everything, but I refused to sign the agreement that I gave up the right to take them to court if they try to screw me. The company we work for today is very different. First off, my buddy is a C-level executive there, and I report straight to him, so we're both very high up in the corporate organization. The HR people are excellent in this company, helpful, friendly, and most importantly, competent, at least the ones we work with in the corporate offices. Other offices in other countries may be different. I almost got fired from Best Buy in Alabama for missing work to have cancer surgery. Fuck that company so hard. Not only did I have cancer surgery, I was terrified I'd lose my job at any time. I even got called by HR off the clock between chemo appointments to confirm I was sick. It still frustrates me just thinking about it. GF's friend at Target went to HR cause the supervisor was hitting on her, and she constantly turned him down cause she had a BF. When she complained with proof of the manager sexting her and all, she ended up getting fired. Nothing happened to the supervisor. I was kinda molested by the head of HR and he got me by using all the wording from the anti-harassment training that he had arranged for the place. At the time, my employer was deciding whether to keep me or can me, and I was very stressed about it. He was the one to decide. I came to have a meeting him about it and he made up a bunch of excuses to keep hugging me, the whole time joking by saying, "Ha, this is okay, right? I have your consent, right? Got to ask consent. Ha. I mean, who do you go to when it's the head of HR that does this?" They had already fired me and he knew it, but didn't tell me. We had another meeting with the head of my division a week or so later, where they just said, "We aren't renewing you," and he tossed a big envelope across the table with all the unemployment stuff. Wally World. I got sick for 3 days and got a doctor's note explaining why I was gone. I went into HR and explained that at the time I didn't have a primary doctor as I had just gotten on health insurance from the company. Without a primary doctor I couldn't fill out the leave paperwork and asked for help. HR told me not worry about it and to just let the claim be rejected so that they could manually approve it. I made sure to give the doctor's note to HR but sadly didn't keep a copy for myself. Missing those 3 days brought me over the point policy for attendance. But HR waited 2.5 months before firing me, only a week before one of those points would have rolled off, bringing me back in line with policy. It also managed to screw me out of my raise. I asked HR if there was any way to stop this and fix what was going on. Almost begging for the job back only to be told to ask the store manager who they left out had retired and was no longer with the company. I was told by HR that they never said that they could help me about the points and paperwork and that I had never given them any information about any problems as I was being fired. This all came to a head when I filed for unemployment. HR tried to deny the claim and ended up in a 3-way call with me, a member of my state's unemployment office and HR. After the member heard my side and then HR's side, he started to pick at HR's story. The 2.5 months after policy break for attendance coupled with a copy of that note that I went back to the doctor for a second one backfired on HR and had the state watching them, plus Wally World was ordered to pay for my unemployment. Got a better paying job now, but fuck that HR lady for being a two-faced bitch. She also does payroll. Lied about getting my late check to me, said she'd done everything she could. I called her recourse and he got it done ASAP. Yep, there was paperwork for me to do. She didn't know or care. Long time grudge. Late December back in 99. Everyone was preparing for the Millennium Bug and, as HPUX sysadmin, and because I worked the closest, I was asked to go into the office after midnight and run a few tests. It didn't bother me, because I don't drink and generally didn't go overboard for New Year celebrations. If everything was good, it would take half hour, I would send a few pager messages and go home, 1 hour at most, including traveling. If things went bad, I would be calling anyone and everyone, to pass the problem to someone else. So, for the inconvenience, my CTO offered minimum 6 hours overtime at 2.5x pay rate. We had heard of people getting paid pounds for working the Millennium, but this sounded like a fine deal to me. Everything went smoothly. I was back home by 1:30 AM. Then, in January, it came time to claim. It got through my department manager but was kicked back by HR. Their view was that, because I had the on-call pager that week, I was entitled to claim the normal, very small, pager rate and call-out rate for the hour worked. It took a couple of months and, according to my manager, the CTO had to have a quiet word with the head of HR and ask her exactly what she was doing during her New Year celebration, but I got my money. TL, doctor was offered £150 for doing a system check after the Millennium. After the fact, when no problems appeared, HR decided that it wasn't worth the money and fought to only pay normal work rates. We found a spy camera in our department office. It was shaped like a charging brick and had been recording video and audio all night. We copied the videos off the camera after the offender took it down and left it out on their desk. We took the video file that showed the person sneaking around an employee to remove the camera and turned that in with the information of what happened. That was almost a year ago now and nothing has been done. Getting ready to turn it in ourselves to the FBI. The delicious part is now the company isn't just guilty of 2 felonies, but also a misdemeanor because it is a crime not to report that crime. Marshmallow futures people. I was working at a 5-star hotel years ago. I was a banquet man, so I would set up and tear down events like weddings, parties, etc. I knew something was up when as a new guy they left me alone to tear down a huge bar mitzvah and set it up for the NBA. As you could imagine, the room was a mess. I stayed by myself until 5 AM to tear it down and set up it. Couldn't get it done. Once the morning serving staff came in, they complained. I was like fuck this and went home. The next shift I went to HR to complain. Turns out I was getting suspended for being hostile towards my co-workers. Days later I get a call being told that it would be to separate. If anything good has come from COVID-19, it is knowing how that company has probably lost a ton of money. I remember telling a woman I was dating this story and she was just like, that's fucked up. I just quit a job I loved due to HR. Our receptionist wore multiple hats and constantly gossiped about personal bussiness and payroll duties, also made accusations and hindered everybody's work ethic, devalued workers' position to customers. I wrote the owners multiple letters, even had a state of consensus signed by multiple different employees about her. Well, I'm no longer there. A co-worker complained to HR about his manager being too hard on him and ended up getting fired. HR is not your friend. Do not trust them. Now payroll, on the other hand, payroll is your friend. Payroll doesn't give 2 shits about your problem and you can tell them anything you want. Had a co-worker tell me some anomalies another was doing and then started noticing. Disappearing for hours and sleeping in car. They had a job they could easily say were busy and always mobile. Coming into work late and clocking late but calling HR to say they forgot. I witnessed that one myself. One day saying they went to X school and another the next day. So one day with multiple witnesses she called them out. They then proceeded to say Hitler was right, he should have killed all you Jews. Knowing my co-worker was Jewish. They escalated up the chain but not one person would back them up. While they investigated, the co-worker friend was placed on thankfully paid leave. Everyone at work started treating them poorly. Tried to get recordings but it was too late. Lawyers said they had a case but would be a nightmare to prove and prop cost too much in long run. They did quite a few other crappy things to them and they eventually had to leave due to HR write-ups and issues with coworkers being buttholes. A couple of colleagues and I went to HR to whistle-blow on the head of department starting a relationship with a junior newbie, who was then quickly promoted 3 times in 4 months to a very senior position which he definitely didn't have the experience of knowledge to be in. HR reassured us it was all anonymous and there would be no repercussions for us. Cut to 2 months later, head of department sits me down and informs me I'll be let go for not being a team player and poor performance. Turns out HR had told them everything, including exactly who had made the complaints. HR doesn't work for you, they work for the company, and now I never forget it. One co-worker is known to be a general fuck-up. She would generally hide it by being nice and on every social commit. And she recently changed departments for a promotion. Her manager would cover up her shitty work because of fear of during someone on the same committee as he and legal. Or dump it back to us. When the manager tried to transfer her back, the head of her previous department works for legal and spoke glowing of her and wouldn't take her back. So her manager quit for another job. Well, the new manager was also promoted from another department, got it apparently by saving the company a lot of money cutting useless crap in his department, and is all about process that leads to results. He doesn't give a crap about typical work hours. You can set your own schedule just as long as things work, and if it doesn't work, he needs an explanation of why it doesn't so he can help fix it. There is a rumor that he is autistic or something, because he's really unflappable, and believes people when they tell him about things. To a fault. She just wasn't doing any work. And the work was terrible and full of errors. So he asked her what was going on. She said she didn't have time in her day to do the work as there was too much, and she never has any training. So he had her pulled from 3 social commits, hired a temp for 4 weeks, and got them both training, and took the training too. But fuck-up woman complained to HR about him to HR. So HR went to write him up for a poisoned work environment. He showed them the email where she was basically working on social committed for 5 hours a week and she was behind in her work. So he hired a temp, got everyone trained, and the temp who had less education than him and fuck-up lady was doing better than his staff. And asked for his budget to be increased so he could have a part-time worker if she was truly needed. So now HR is ducking her calls. They don't want to tell her she's a fuck-up because they like her. But this weird dude is doing weird paperwork that's really well documented that she can't do her job and someone worth less experience is doing better than her. They just want out of it. But fuck-up woman is not having any of that. She starts hanging out on coffee breaks with the HR VP and her previous department head about how she is a nervous wreck, how she hasn't had any training and more. And both these management types know that she has had training. And are getting really sick of her complaining all the time. And that's when HR flipped out. They got her pamphlets on the benefits package outlining the help and psychiatric line. And stopped hanging out with her. She tried applying for a job in her old department, but they didn't want her. She was telling everyone her situation and how unfair it was. Then fuck-up woman really fucked up. There was an anonymous employee survey. Everyone in her department stated they were pretty happy. Except her. She thought it would be clever to say that the management team in her department were racist to mess her boss's reputation. But he's multiracial. And the 2 other managers on her team are all pook. But her VP is whiter than bread, and she took the racist accusation to think it was referring to her. And everyone in the department knew who was miserable because fuck-up woman told everyone. Plus HR and the VP's bonus is tied to employee scores, so she just fucked them out of their bonus. Things got ugly after that. She got escorted out of the building. All this because she didn't want to do her work, thought HR was her friend, and when they weren't, doubled down claiming she was experiencing racism. It was bonkers. Not as bad as many of you people, but still pissed me off. I'm over IT and I put in long hours, weekend work, etc. regularly. I've been here for over 10 years and basically rebuilt their operation properly from the ground up. I had a server incident and put in 12 hours on a Sunday night/Monday morning, which everyone knew about. Monday was a staff meeting that ran 3 hours in a hot room and I went to sleep during a particularly boring rant by the legal department head about how overworked they are. I got called into HR over this, first time in 30 plus years of employment. They lectured me about commitments to work and had the nerve to warn we fire people for sleeping on the job. Yes, we fire nurses who sleep on the night shift without monitoring their patients, not staffers who drift off in a status meeting. Particularly after finishing a 90-hour week and operating on a couple of hours of sleep. Apparently the only reason they were up in arms is that the legal person complained about not having my attention in a critical staff update to her friend, the CEO. That was 2 years ago and I'm still not over it. Every time a recruiter calls me and I'm tempted to dodge them, that incident comes to mind. We had an anonymous survey to fill out on the company, department and managers. I hated the company and my department but needed the job at the moment. I was very suspicious about it being truly anonymous, so I gave average responses, nothing too negative or too positive. The department was full of cheerleaders that always claimed it was the best company ever and how great our managers were. It felt like I was alone in hating it and I thought my negative responses would make me stand out against the grain. In the end, the anonymous survey showed that our department ranked lowest in the company in terms of employee satisfaction and our managers also received the lowest ranking out of all managers in the company. All these cheerleaders secretly hated the company as much as I did but only expressed it when they thought they were anonymous. Rather than change the management, a few weeks in they started firing employees one after the other. I somehow survived the firing, and I am certain it was because of my very careful diplomatic responses. I quit some time later and they were very surprised because they thought I was satisfied with the work culture and my job. Anonymous indeed. I have two. One, not so much HR as a shitty coworker weaponized them when COVID struck. My bosses thought it was a hoax, and they ignored distancing and mask rules, not even removing the snack bowl of chips from the heavily trafficked courier area, despite a company-wide mandate of rules and guidelines. When I complained to HR, they told my bosses instead, and I was taken aside and written up. I quit that job and I know from former co-workers that not a thing has changed since. 2. A co-worker that was 60 plus had moved into a new townhome that was owned by a gay couple, and the next morning expressed admiration of the fact we've come so far in society that they can be open and loving without fear. Another co-worker, with a gay brother, went to HR complaining it offended her and he was sent to sensitivity training for talking about homosexuality at work, with the extra topping of having his yearly raise denied explicitly mentioning this incident. I've been an exec at several large companies and am super disappointed to see that it's usually nothing more than the ass covering department. It could be one of the best roles ever. Let's create the greatest culture and attract the best people, making this such a fun, rewarding, challenging place to be with loads of development opportunities, support, coaching and all the trimmings. Let's recognize that a company is really its people, so let's create fertile soil for them to grow and feel fulfilled and therefore be the greatest evangelists for the company. Because it's legitimately awesome. No, fuck you, we're here for the sole purpose of making sure you don't sue the company, and that when we want you to leave, we've got enough data and leverage to make sure you go without a fuss. Bunch of bastards. They could have made it beautiful, but no, they make it out of shit and gravel and corn. Thanks for listening. And thanks for the silver, kind stranger. My much older, married boss kissed me after an all-day off-site. I told a woman in HR. She was furious. The next day, she said the male CEO wanted to handle the situation. I was removed from the project and my boss was not punished. HR is a joke. I gave 30-day notice at the giant home improvement retailer. No one notified me that all the money in my HSA would go away unless I spent it. Only $80. But I helped that bitch jumpstart her POS dodge twice in the snow during the 30 days, not to mention resolving several computer and networking crises. No hourly employee had given more than a few days' notice. I worked in a very toxic environment once, where the department manager, my team manager and the HR lady ran the show and made everyone miserable. We were called in to get lectured for pretty much anything, conversations were listened to during our breaks etc. Once I was homesick with the flu and high fever, my phone rang, it was my team manager. Didn't take it. She then proceeds to send me a bunch of texts and call me non-stop, because she couldn't find a document on the server and I had to answer my phone now. Tired of the situation, I answer the phone and just had to explain her how to navigate on Explorer basically. I was furious. Back to work, I go to the HR, just asking if this is normal to be almost harassed on my private number during medical illness, receiving texts etc. HR lady says she's gonna talk to my manager. She must have lied a bunch during this interview, cause next thing you know I'm called in again and it starts getting weird. HR lady is insinuating that I have personal mental health issues that makes me say bad things about my manager and that it's because I hate myself that I'm mean to others, all that kind of BS. I start crying, from rage, cause I feel trapped there and proceed to walk to the door to exit this weird session. HR lady screams in my face, how dare you leave? This is not over. You have no right to leave now, I'm not finished. If you walk through that door you're done here. Close that door. I panicked and stayed in her office, terrified by her. I got lectured on my pretending mental health problems for another 20 minutes. After that episode, I called the state office for labor protection etc. and told them on the phone what happened. They were shocked. I quit the company soon after and left it at that. Another of my ex-colleagues experiences the same thing and goes to the labor office to tell what is going on. Some years later we happened to discover that they were under investigation for mobbing because too many people had complained. Guess what? They fired the HR lady, blaming it all on her, saying she was unstable etc. Karma. I went to a job fair last year and the HR at the door were filtering people by who can enter or not in the fair depending on their CV. I had to argue for 10 minutes that pure math and theoretical physics background is more than enough for most data-driven jobs, but she kept arguing that IT was not written on my CV. After a while she finally let me in as she was tired to argue. Once inside, the first company I talked to was looking for mathematicians to solve some deep learning problem they had. I told them what just happened and they were shocked. I worked in retail for a good solid 6 weeks. One day I posted on a Facebook page in relation to cancer. My father passed away when I was young to cancer, but we always used to joke about it and call it Timmy the tumor and other funny names. I mentioned this in a Facebook group that created a post regarding cancer and how people deal with it. So I said that we used to make jokes about it and give cancer funny names and a funny personality to help us cope. Then there was Karen. She wrote a long reply how I am a disgusting person and how it was all fake because cancer isn't funny and can never be funny to anyone. I tried to calm the situation by just explaining that this is what our family did to cope, but she was having none of it. Literally 3 days later I get a letter from corporate mentioning a disciplinary meeting and how I have brought the company's reputation into disrepute because this one woman couldn't cope with how we as a family dealt with the hardest thing of our lives, at the time. After me trying to explain to them what it was about, they said, well, there is only one course of action for this. I'm afraid I simply stood up, gave them my name badge and said I quit. If you believe I have brought the company's name into disrepute, then you guys have done more to damage it than I have. I won't shop in any of your stores, and I will tell everyone I know the same. You're fucking disgusting. In 10 years, I have never been into one of their stores, or any of their other chains and brands. My friends also haven't been using them for years as well. I got hired on at a company after getting laid off from my previous job doing work at a tier lower than what I was doing. I only had about 2 years experience working at that tier, so it was going to be let's see how you perform before we put you at that level sort of thing. That's fine with me. I can prove myself easily and I've done it multiple times before, and the company is rapidly expanding. At this point, I've been working there for about 6 months. I've been hustling and putting my nose to the grindstone. Showing up early, hitting every deadline, and being well respected and liked by my co-workers. I barely see my main supervisor, and when I do, he is very distant and is not very approachable. So the job I really want starts to open up due to the expansion. I ask my main supervisor for a meeting about filling one of the positions. I asked very professionally about our agreement when hired about moving up, of that may happen anytime soon. He scoffed and said that we never made such agreement and that he didn't trust me. I was in pure shock as I saw this guy lie through his teeth. Thankfully this was a written agreement upon hire and I brought this to attention of HR. The only thing that wasn't clear was length of time after hire would I be considered moving up. We had a sit-down meeting where I brought a copy of the agreement. They essentially said that I need to build their trust first, and I was still confused even when I brought up my work performance. I then tried explaining how they were starting to lose my trust and confidence in their leadership. Their response was, "You have to trust us." No, I absolutely fucking don't. After the meeting I started looking for work elsewhere while barely doing what was needed with my current job. Found a job that paid so much more and was the job I was going for. I didn't even leave a 2-week notice. I just walked up to the HR person, dropped my work badge off at the desk and said I am not coming back. Someone who refuses to listen to me and berate me while telling that I have to trust them doesn't get my trust or respect. HR at my company put signs up everywhere saying stay home if you're sick, then started writing people up for attendance policy violations if they called out twice in 60 days. They want to lay people off but need an excuse. I was promoted from employee to manager. A month later one of my colleagues decided to hit on me. I'm male, she's female and a few years younger than me. Despite now being her boss, she decides she won't accept no for an answer. At first she maintains I'm clearly interested in her and just being difficult because of the work setting, ignoring that I had a girlfriend at the time as well. Then her performance review comes around and she does pretty well, but a couple areas need improvement compared to the rest of the team. I'm happy to help her on that so she can be a top performer by year's end. She lost her shit. The story changes. She decides that I'm punishing her because I can't be with her. She starts to refuse any coaching or constructive criticism, badmouths me to colleagues and clients, insists I should just get over myself and date her like we both want. I continue to reject her advances. HR gets involved, and despite everything being documented and numerous people supporting me, they put me on notice to play nice with her. She is a spoiled rich kid with an insurance lawyer father, so HR makes the decision that the company can't waste the time or money in legal troubles she would create if she was fired. Even with 90% certainty anything she dumped on us would be dismissed in the end. Eventually she decides she doesn't want to be with me anymore and I'm just a terrible boss who hates her because she won't date me. Again, I've been rejecting her for months at this point. Her behavior gets worse and I have another manager assigned to literally relay instructions to her. She will flip her shit at anything I say, tells HR I'm not emotional enough when I communicate, or too emotional, or not clear, or too clear and it feels harsh, whatever. If someone else gives her my advice, verbatim repeat of what I said, then she has no objections. A year and a half later I get promoted again. Spoilers, I was not a terrible manager after all, and thankfully moved to a new team. I have a lot of bitterness towards HR types for making me endure that brat for so long. I had an 18-month sexual harassment and insubordination headache, all because she might have moved that harassment to the company if we formally disciplined her, let alone fired her. HR will always put the company over you. We got a confidential employee survey handed to us at work. It had our employee number on the top of the page. I work in biotech, and until a few years ago we were allowed to have an alcoholic beverage at lunchtime unless you were handling something dangerous. My workmate, principal scientist, essentially a lab consultant/manager, and colleague finished for the day at 1 p.m. as its biologics and cells dictate when we need to work. They went to the pub across the road before going home, and HR clocked them having a pint. On Monday they were took into a disciplinary without asking what happened first. They got told in the meeting they were getting a warning, assuming it's a verbal warning as they're good employees, despite them saying they'd finished for the day. Then it got retracted when the clock-in/clock out information was shown a week later. Afterwards a lot of us went to the pub at lunch and just drank rum and coke instead to spite HR. Then this one day we clocked said HR person drinking wine, so someone I work with went to her boss with photographic evidence. Nothing happened that we know of, although it would be bad management if we all knew she had been disciplined. I argue that if she had been caught we'd have had a company email reminding us we cannot have a drink at lunch though. Partner was made redundant. Next day she didn't answer a phone call from her work, because she needed a bit of time and was going to deal with it later. I missed a call, because I was driving at the time. They sent police to the house for a welfare check. I suspect the corporate HR dick firing checklist probably had it listed as the correct response to someone not returning calls, but definitely a sign the HR lady was a heartless sociopath. White HR lady walked up to the only black employees at the holiday party and asks, "Hey, what's the deal with that you can say N-word with hard R, but I can't?" And in the most odd, playful and genuinely curious tone. Bit late to this party, but my current area manager is fucking an employee at another store I work at often. A year ago this woman was a Christmas casual and now she's in a management position. They frequently take sick days together. Her leave applications are approved without fail while others are almost always denied or questioned, and her store is favored above others for staffing matters and general needs. HR is aware. Nothing is being done. Lamau. HR wanted everyone to do an external survey. It was a media award for best company to work for that they ran every year. Most of the people filled it in and our company came like 300th on the list, quite deserved. We all got called in, shat on from a dizzy height and told that we will all retake the survey and the scores better be higher. They arranged with the media company for us to retake. Only about 2% of the employees redid the survey. Luckily it was anonymous, they did not partake. The next year, new upper management came in. There was one mandatory meeting for all employees. Usually mandatory meetings are held more than once so that everyone from every shift and department has a chance to attend. We were told to bring our cell phones to the meeting. Rumors were running wild that they were going to search our phones or something. When we got there were instructions on the whiteboard on how to log onto a particular site and take a survey. The survey topic? How great it was to work there. We were told it was anonymous and to be honest, but you used your employee ID number to log in, and management walked around looking over people's shoulders as they filled it out. Not surprisingly, there were soon posters everywhere bragging about how we were number 3 in the state or something in our industry for best places to work or some shit. Rumor was upper management got hefty bonuses as a reward. Us peasants on the floor were still poorly trained, short-staffed, bullied by middle management, and constantly out of the supplies needed to do our jobs. I've had 2 employers, one IT, one teaching, that laid off our entire departments with no notice. Just here to say hello to BuzzFeed, for when they come here to turn this into an article. I was being sexually assaulted by a 60-year-old co-worker when I was 21. They fired him as soon as I reported him, but offered me nothing in the way of help. I ended up at my doctor's office because I thought I was having a heart attack, but it was an anxiety attack. He took me off work for a week. When I went back, I was laid off the minute I walked in the door with 2 weeks severance. I swear the HR my company uses is way too nice. Y'all have some major horror stories in comparison to me. Worst thing for me ever was not being able to fire people. which, I assume came into play cause of way too many managers abusing the ability to fire people easily. But oh my gosh, how I hate how many loopholes a person can somehow squeeze through before my company moves to termination. When I used to work for an accounting firm and got treated like shit by one particular staff member, I complained to HR, then weeks later saw that HR person sitting on the CEO's knee at Friday night drinks, talk about professionalism. They never did anything about the staff member. The place I worked, they were about 6 to 8 months behind on reviews. When they finally did them, 2 people in my department were wondering if it was retrospective to when the written day of the review was. Basically they got raises, that on paper say they happened 6 to 8 months before, but they obviously haven't been paid that rate. So they both had separately emailed HR about it, but she kept ignoring them, and she was never in her office. A few of us were going to lunch one day and passed her office, and they noticed her in there, so they popped in to ask if she'd seen the emails / could answer their question. I was standing outside the door waiting for them, and HR lady went from first denying she saw the emails, to outright screaming at them that they've been harassing her by email for weeks and now they've trapped her in her office to corner her and shout at her for more money. She's like literally screaming this. They're saying like, wait, no, we just asked a question, if the answer is no, that's fine, we just wanted to find out. They finally just left her office. And while we were at lunch, she sent scathing emails to all the bosses above us with their names about how they're out of control, cornered her and demanded money. Which turned into them each being pulled separately into meetings with our direct bosses and the owner of the company. They both ended up getting fired for harassment, because the higher-ups couldn't see why HR would lie about such a thing. I tried to tell my boss that's not what happened, that I was in the hallway and heard the entire thing, but essentially my boss told me to keep my mouth shut because HR would just take me down with them. That woman was an absolute nightmare. HR is the boss's mother-in-law. She doesn't know what she's doing, very unprofessional in terms of emails I've gotten from her and calls. She sweeps all the problems under the rug to create a toxic workplace, no matter if it's racism, bullying, or theft. Her and management choose to look the other way. Calls herself work mum. Yeah, no thank you. I had a manager that always answered his phone on speaker, regardless of if he was in a private setting or other people around. Real professional, huh? One day, a co-worker of mine reached out to make a complaint against that manager. I'm sitting in the office, his office door is open. He answers on speaker, Norm, and they say, hey Mike, just a heads up, employee such and such just called in a complaint against you. I was absolutely stunned. From that moment on, I knew HR wouldn't have my best interest in mind. My company had a rating on Indeed and Glassdoor of around 2.6 stars. They hired a consulting firm to get the rating above 3 stars, which resulted in HR asking certain employees to leave a review on the sites and telling them to let the HR director know when it's done. I was not one of the people asked to leave a review, but I wrote an anonymous one anyways, and it wasn't very positive. A few months later, HR made everyone sign a legal document saying they won't leave any type of negative review on any website while employed there and for 2 years after leaving, even if you get fired. If you didn't want to sign the document, then you were fired on the spot. The document also said we can't recruit any other employees after we leave, for a certain number of years. Can't even tell them there is a job opening or have any type of contact regarding a job opportunity. It sounds like lots of people are saying anonymous feedback and engagement surveys are actually a trap and could cost you your job. I guess you can't trust a word from HR, ever, at all. Worked IT support at a small P&M law firm, about 25 people, where HR were the office managers. For the last 3 years I was one of their favorite employees. I was the type to always want to go above and beyond, not that I was perfect in any way. But, I showed up on time, did my work consistently, didn't complain too much and got along with everyone. But I did have a bad habit of ending up the employee rep when it came to certain issues, like the absence of a healthcare plan and a case of sexual harassment between a department head and an intern. She quit due to the lack of response from management. I came in as a file clerk and worked my way to IT. I liked my job. Sure, it didn't pay the best, but it was consistent and I was always learning something new. I was an official employee, whereas the IT head was an independent contractor who came into the office once or twice a month to check up on my work. The Friday before lockdowns began, I called the manager to ask if they had a plan on how to work from home, provided a lockdown was announced. She didn't have one, so she called the head attorney to ask, told him it was me asking, and he got pissed off. He came to my little corner office and told me I was acting scared and irrational and there's no way we're getting locked down. Strike one. He was a workaholic, so the idea of not coming into the office was a nightmare to him. So I shrugged and let it go. Later on, my co-worker suggested a bottom-of-the-barrel, least you can do, list of COVID protocols, and wanted some of us to review and sign off on it before presenting it. I did, as well as the receptionist and a few others. After getting our signatures, she went into the office to present it to the bosses. The meeting with the head attorney and the office managers went horribly. In what I was told was a pretty heated exchange, she mentioned me as one of the people who reviewed it and recommended it. Strike two? So I got called into the office to be reprimanded. My boss was in serious denial about the potential lockdown and thought the list of protocols was fear-mongering and threatened to fire me for co-signing, told me I was lucky to be working. Literally an hour before clock-out time, our mayor announces the lockdown. Suddenly the whole management/HR team is struggling to come up with a plan for lockdown. My boss calls us all into the conference room and offers everyone a beer. I abstain from casual drinking and smoking because I'm a recovering addict, strike three, and attempted to shoot the breeze. Pandemic schmandemic. He didn't know what to do. The head IT called in and laid out a blueprint, based on what his other firms were doing. We discussed some work that I could do for the foreseeable future. So, I spent the first 2 days working at home just doing whatever grunt work I could virtually, but I knew the end was nigh. Then I got a call at 10 a.m. Wednesday morning. HR told me I needed to start coming into the office, despite lockdown orders, because this pandemic is only going to last like a few weeks anyway and I was their essential worker. I had my reasons for not wanting to, among those being the hour-plus subway commute, and my living situation. I had more than just myself to consider, and at the salary I was making, and with no health care at that time, it did not seem worth it. This was before stimulus was being talked about. After making it clear I couldn't budge, I told them I understood the situation they were in and that whatever they needed to do would be fine. Because I'd been pretty dependable before, they weren't expecting that response and it really angered them. So, midway through us discussing whatever kind of severance they could offer, 2 weeks of PTO that I earned, they lied about when I asked before, and hid from our employee accounts to deter us from requesting vacation time. They started structuring the narrative to make it sound like I was being negligent and ungrateful. So they terminated me, of course, technically illegally, but summarized my termination as this employee was difficult to work with. I believe they thought by the time my PTO ran out the world would be back to normal, they'd be back in the office and I'd come begging. Little did they know. Midway through the pandemic I started getting freelance work as a video editor and I have enough consistent gigs that I make a good living now. I'm much happier now than I was there. The firm did start blowing up my phone again around August, but I blocked their numbers. I'd ignored a lot of BS because I valued having a stable job above all else. Truth be told, I was never going to quit. Looks like getting fired was what I needed. My fiancée at the time and I worked at a hospital. Before our shift she gets a call her grandmother an hour outside of town had a stroke. Was told if I went with her, I would forfeit my job. I left. Fought with HR for a week to get my job back and then was blackballed from transferring to another unit, literally was offered a position on another floor only for it to suddenly no longer be available, causing me to eventually turn in my 2 weeks notice instead of deal with my toxic manager. Our HR person literally won't even speak to anyone. If you go in to ask something, she blows you off with "I'm busy," or usually begins griping about how she hasn't had her lunch yet and dare anyone come bother her. One of my co-workers was out on COVID leave, and the same day she received a positive test result, one of the people from HR tried to pressure her into coming back to work. The woman couldn't figure out why my co-worker refused to come in that same day. Just expose all your co-workers and the 100+ people you guys interact with on a daily basis to an illness that makes you drown in your own lung fluid. No big deal. I went to our. My boss had been bullying me and several other apprentices. Ended up in an office alone, no one from my old office acknowledges my existence, and I don't get invited to important meetings anymore. All because HR decided to side with my boss, who convinced everyone that I'm lying because I'm a very sensitive woman who just isn't cut for the IT industry. I actually only went to HR because another apprentice got bullied so much that he one day told me he was considering suicide. At least they moved him to a different location where he is thriving, so I guess it was worth it in that sense. HR is never your friend. They are hired by the company to protect the company. None of them are to be trusted, ever. I got a promotion. I confided with HR that there were some things going wrong in the office with regards to one of their current directors, unfair favoritism. I then did not get the promotion anymore. When I quit my job not long after, that director came to me, smirking, wishing me good luck at my next job, and told me that he was really hoping for me to get that promotion. Obviously being sarcastic and trying to plunge the knife deeper into my back. He was fired about a year later for sexual harassment. The guy he was harassing sued the company and they settled. I have no idea what amount of money was involved, but I'm sure it was a decent amount. I got an email yesterday asking employees to take an anonymous survey about whether or not they planned to take the COVID vaccine when it became available, non-medical field. The geniuses set it up in quiz mode in a Google form.